The local election results are out. Labour have been absolutely obliterated. The Tories don't even exist anymore. Reform are ascendant, but the Greens are absolutely hot on their heels. What does any of this mean for transport in Britain, though? That's exactly what we're going to be answering in tonight's show. As ever, if you want to arm yourself with the tools to make transport better, then joining the Patreon for £5 a month is a great place to start, giving you the free audiobook of How the Rails Will Fix the Future, as well as access to the weekly bonus episode with the full back catalogue, adding a big chunk to the Rail Natter canon. Go to patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the City 225 fades away, right, what are the headlines that count for us? Well, we're very excited about the fact that the Green Party have approximately doubled their best ever total vote number, which was in 2023. They now have nearly 2 million votes nationally, which is great. There's one thing that we want to pick up that Zach said before the local elections, because that's relevant to us.
I hear people over and over again telling me they want to end rip-off Britain. We have this toxic combination of low wages and high bills, and people are really, really struggling. And there's something called a spending multiplier, which means that every pound you spend on buses, you get £4.50 back into the economy. So what we're announcing today is talking about taking buses into public control. At the moment, the privatisation experiment means that buses far too often are too expensive, routes are cut, and actually they just don't feel very efficient. And one of the biggest key principles of getting someone on a bus is getting them to use a bus in younger life. So we've also been talking about free bus travel for under 22s, just as part of a wider package of making transport cheaper for everyone. But it's important that our cities, and particularly rural areas, have cheaper buses. You know, sometimes when I visit people in the country, if you say to them, you might have a bus every few hours, they say, actually, every few days if you're lucky. And it's outrageous that so many people have to depend on their cars. This is a part of a wider discussion about council funding. We live in the 5th wealthiest economy in the world, yet 50 families own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population. To spell that out, that's 50 wealthiest families owning more than 34 million people. The government often tell us there's no money left, but actually there's lots of money, just far too often it's going to private companies and multimillionaires and billionaires. The Green Party, we want to make the case that actually the money should be spent in our communities and on our public services.
Indeed. You know, the boost to the buses policies was a really good policy, but how much of it are we going to be seeing actually rolling out anywhere? Because, you know, we've got councils that have gone green, but to what extent, you know, what power do they have? And, of course, chuck into the mix this prick. You know, Reform have done extremely well, of course, across the local elections. We'll get into one of the interesting points about the Reform numbers later, though. So it's not all. It's not an entire hope is lost situation. Let's go through the results though at large. You know, this is obviously a pre-record. I'll tell you why it's a pre-record and a fairly snappy one. In the kind of the mid-reel ad, but we'll get there anyway. Reform, ugh. Right? The Senedd. Plaid cleaned up, fantastic work from fair play to Plaid Cymru, really good job. And it's not, you know, they are, I would say, a better bet for Wales than Labour are. It's disappointing that the Greens didn't do better, but you know they can be proud of the results they got. They are now in the Senedd, which is great. Reform, I think it's bizarre that an English nationalist party did very well in Wales, but you know. British politics is bizarre, so you know anything's possible. So Plaid, short of a majority though, and it's likely that they will go into either they will pick up a minority. Well, at the moment they're talking about a minority government, but they might end up deciding they want to have a relationship with Welsh Labour after all, rather than the Greens, which is well they need to. That's the calculus essentially for them to get across the majority line. What that means for transport is well, Plaid were not promising anything particularly radical, but they do have some strong views on, for example, the story around HS2 funding and Barnett consequentials. And, you know, irrelevant to the material facts at play there, you know, as I always point out, often the wrong, it's not the case that HS2 doesn't benefit Wales. It's the fact that government said that it is a joint English and Welsh project that's the problem. And also the fact that actually Scotland benefits less than Wales does, but does get a Barnett consequential. So that is, you know, the point is that incoherent policy. Go back to the episode we covered on that. We went into good detail on it. But anyway, the point being here, Plaid might pick that up and might then pursue greater devolution of rail into Wales. That might be good news. If that is something that Plaid pursued, that would be really, really good news, because Wales needs to have much stronger control over its railways. It needs to be a devolved matter. And that might take away quite a few of the arguments around, well, they don't get Barnett consequential for rail projects because it's not devolved them. That might put paid to that, which would be very good. Let's hope that Plaid are as bold and radical as some of their members suggest they might be. Let's see what happens. But I think it's a good thing that Labour are no longer, there is no longer a Labour government either side of the M4. I think that's a good thing for Wales, frankly, because we've seen some good policies coming out of Labour. Go back to the past, the previous episode, lots of actually good transport policies. I do think Wales is doing very well on a transport perspective, but it could be doing so much better. And perhaps Plaid is going to push in the right direction, or maybe they'll make it worse. Plaid has a lot of very conservative members who might be strongly against things like the 20 miles per hour limits, despite the success of that policy and the fact that it was basically a kind of a cross-party agreement that it was a good thing. So let's see. I'm nervous, frankly, with the fact that there's perhaps not quite enough of a Green presence to hold their feet to the fire, as Nathan said last week. What about Scotland? Well, it's an interesting story, really. Basically, everyone else other than the SNP has about the same level of presence, including Reform and the Tories. But the Greens have a sizable presence, which is really good news, like a properly sizable presence, which they can be very proud of in Scotland, actually. So I suspect that we will see an SNP Green coalition, even though SNP again might go for a minority government situation. Let's see what happens. But that, what does that mean for transport in Scotland? Well, if the Greens have that keymaker position, then that will allow for more positive policies around rail, particularly. But the challenge in Scotland always is that the SNP are uninterested in going anywhere near buses because the bus barons are major donors to the SNP. So, although some of those big bus baron donors are going out, are driving themselves absolutely nuts. So and kind of moving towards like Reform. So who knows? They might abandon the SNP and then the SNP can kind of flank them. Fingers crossed. What does this mean for Scotland? Well, kind of basically much of the same for Scottish transport policy. No change really. What about England then? What about the council results? Well, yes, everyone should be kind of bleakly depressed at the scale of Reform's kind of dominance. It is depressing, but you should be pleased the fact that Labour have been painfully obliterated, because that is going to make them either change or die, and both of those are, either of those is a good outcome. The Green Party, though, the largest rise in seats after Reform, a massive increase, 441. But I think the numbers really get interesting when you look at vote share, because that kind of represents what the feeling across the country is, and 26% is Reform, absolutely. But second are the Green Party. Green Party are with 18% vote share. You can sort of see how that looks over time here, which is quite nice. It's an interesting thing, projecting this into, projected national vote share. The thing that I wanted to pick up on this, with Labour being fourth now and Reform first, Green second, Tories third, which is hilarious because they almost don't exist broadly, which is kind of fun. Lib Dem down in fifth. The Reform have performed worse in terms of national vote share this year versus the previous local elections, so they've peaked. And that's kind of interestingly enough matches up to their polling numbers. You can see that they peaked last year. So if they peaked, meanwhile the Greens are ascendant at this point. So my hope is that Reform, particularly as they've absorbed lots of Conservative members, MPs, generally kind of assimilating the Conservative Party, that actually makes them look much more like the Uni Party. And I think a successful electoral strategy from the Green Party is to point out the fact that Reform are just basically assimilating the Uni Party. They are now the establishment party. And that can also be used to tackle those in Labour and say, well, if you vote for Greens, you get Reform. And it's like, well, there is little difference between Reform and the Labour Party at this point. Some of you might balk at that suggestion, but I'm sorry. Look at what Labour have done in their time in power to disable people, to trans people, genocides. The austerity policies continue to be carried out. There's little difference materially. So that's an interesting one. What about, where the Greens have actually done well? Well, in cities in the north, for example, Newcastle, Manchester, they've done really, really well. Those cities are surrounded by a cyan wall of depression, sure. But in terms of the council results in those cities, it's really spectacular. Newcastle particularly is spectacular, but Manchester really has run really well. Leeds, well, it was West Yorkshire. There are some West Yorkshire locals which have done, again, really, really good results. But actually across the north, the urban north, certainly, the Greens have done very well. So don't let anyone say, oh, the north is all Reform. It's just nonsense. Birmingham, strong showing for the Greens, albeit Reform and other independents kind of vying for control, which kind of ties into also lots of good results. Kind of Norwich, really good result. Generally a very strong result in lots of other sort of urban areas around Labour heartlands, essentially, around England. And London, they've done very, very well indeed. Some disappointments, I would say, in London. I've still not found out whether James Medway did. How he did. James, how did you do? Let me know. I've not seen. I haven't spotted it. I've been preoccupied. You'll find out why momentarily. But one of the things that is interesting is because of the mess. I mean, first past the post is obvious gibberish, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But one of the things that is notable is just the leveling out of, as a result of the first past the post has skewed a lot of these results. They're not really representative of what people are voting. But what is interesting is the extent to which just utter fragmentation. Utter fragmentation. And what's interesting is we're seeing PR being talked about a little more seriously by some of the, I would say, right-wing press grandees who are suddenly, it's dawning on them that this might not go their way. And first past the post could actually throw it in a direction they don't like. An interesting consequence, specific interesting consequence, was the Tories winning Westminster despite losing vote share. Fascinating first past the post result here. The Greens, plus 15% of the vote, swing to the Greens here. Reform behind Labour just utterly decimated. This was a shift from Labour very much to over to, so you look at that, yes, Reform are 11. Well, that's 6 of that left after the, Conservatives being eaten by that swing. But actually Green have taken most of that. That's only 2 of that Reform is from, could be from Labour, because the majority of that Green swing, it will be from that Labour drop of 17%, just a spectacular swing away from Labour towards the Greens, and yet the Tories won it. So first past the post, baffling, utterly baffling. Normally I'll be plugging the bonus here, but this is a photo I inadvertently took and ends up being quite a nice, no one's seeing anything that I don't want them to, image of what happened today as at time of recording, which is Sunday, which was the arrival of little one number 2, 3 weeks early. This week, when you're seeing this, was the week that I was going to finish pulling all of the episodes together to have a full raft of Pat Leave episodes, including bonuses. That's not going to happen now because I need to focus on the little one. So there's going to be a change, which is that we're going to have 2 weeks of pause of Rail Matters. There'll still be a daily upload schedule of clips that'll drop, so you can be entertained by clips from this episode, but also from past episodes. I'll be going through a decent raft of historic episodes. I might even drop a few from the Archipelago series, which might be entertaining, but particularly there'll be some episodes, clips from episodes gone by that we can drop in. But also there'll be no bonuses, specific bonus episodes during the whole of Pat Leave, I think. But what I am going to do, or certainly the first half of Pat Leave, what I am going to do is give little audio updates. So I'll give you little audio updates as to what railway news I've spotted, what things are going on, maybe a little bit of updates from personal life as well, if you're interested. So you'll get some of those. They'll drop at patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. So if you're a £5 and above subscriber, you will get access to those little recordings. They'll just be on Patreon. Little updates, little sort of audio snippets, potentially done with a little breathing munchie on my chest while recorded, depending on what the hell is going on in early second child life. Yes. So thanks for your patience, everyone. But it was a bit of a sudden and dramatic arrival today. And I'm very tired. So, yes. Some news. And we've been talking a lot on Rail Matter of the approach of China when it comes to things like infrastructure maintenance, infrastructure installation, construction, contracting, and trains, new trains. And here's an example where the EU really has arbitrarily deployed its arbitrary rules, its foreign subsidy rules, to try and defeat that. So CRRC, one of the major Chinese consortia, itself part of a consortium theoretically delivering part of the Lisbon Metro, has been ordered to not do that. They have to drop the Chinese supplier because of the theory that, in theory, it receives subsidies that distorts competition, like the European incumbents don't get that. It's been ordered to replace it with Polish manufacturer PESA under the bloc's foreign subsidies regulation. Yeah, so interesting. Desperate, sure. I'm not saying that it's a good thing for China to just come in and absolutely dominate, but it's also puts paid somewhat to the idea of fair competition in Europe, given that, and I don't mind there being big subsidies to national incumbent contractors. I'm fine with that. But I think that that's exactly what always happens. The whole thing is the idea that there is free markets. I think the idea of any free market anywhere is basically a complete gibberish. So yeah, but it's interesting. One to continue keeping an eye on, dear RailNatter viewers. Some more news on a similar theory, actually, which is talking about transparency when it comes to and shall we say fair competition within markets when it comes to the train operators leasing trains at extreme cost. So here's Rail picking up that concerned train operators are paying excessive leasing and maintenance contracts. So pick up this article a little bit. There are concerns that the talks are paying excessive rolling stock leasing and maintenance contracts. The ORR have their rail industry productivity report said that talks have paid over $4 billion in the last year, about 30% or over 30% of their total expenditure, compared to 2011. So what is that? 15 years ago, when it was less than $2 billion a year and 15% of TOC expenditure. So the percentage of TOC expenditure has doubled on the train landlords, which is pretty breathtaking. In 2020, the ORR found that responsibility for maintaining new trains was sitting increasingly with manufacturers rather than the train operators because of the use of new technology, but it's also just because of they've moved to these service contracts because those manufacturers want that subscription model because they can make more out of it. In 2009, there were adverse structural conditions identified by the Competition Commission, and there are worries now that these have persisted. Of course, they've bloody persisted. Now, this is funny because a particular organisation has commented on this, an organisation that I haven't got a huge amount of time for, I'll be honest. The Alliance of Passenger Rail New Entrants, All Rail, a not-for-profit trade body that represents the interests of train operators private train operaters, I should say, across Europe, is one of the companies concerned. Its Secretary General, Nick Brooks, suggested original equipment manufacturers, train builders, may overbid or price aggressively on rolling stock with the aim of recovering margins in a captive market when it comes to maintenance. So private markets that don't act particularly fairly, yeah, interesting looking at private markets and when that's an organization that seeks to rely on captive markets in things like open access operations where there's a geographic monopoly and trying to introduce competition in that context. Interesting. Anyway. So there we go. We've been saying this on RailNatter for a long time that this is a problem, and it's starting to pick up a bit more momentum, it seems, which is interesting. Let's talk about large language models, shall we? And the fact that they are appalling and dreadful, and you should never use them for any sort of information gathering exercises whatsoever, whether that's data manipulation, collecting data, web searches. So researchers at EPFL, which is the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, I believe, in Switzerland, has released a really interesting research paper, and they kind of built one of the hardest hallucination tests that. Alongside the Max Planck Institute, about 1,000 questions across 4 sort of technical domains: legal, medical, research, and coding. The latter kind of being the one that you'd expect it to be good at because it's been built by coding weirdos. They ran all of the top models against these, and the results came back that ChatGPT was wrong 72% of the time, Claude wrong 60% of the time, Gemini wrong 62% of the time, DeepSeek 77% of the time. These are the best models on Earth, and they are crap. This is a dumb technology. It's a stupid dead-end technology. I think an interesting graph to look at, though, was this one, which is the chart that details against each of those 4 domains the success of the various different models. And this is on medical questions, so it's something that's quite similar to like engineering, for example. It's quite detailed, but requires experience on application and a lot of subtlety and nuance to be correct. And ChatGPT is wrong 93% of the time. It hallucinates 93% of the time on medical questions. Gemini, 89%, and Claude, 86% of the time. That is almost total lying, almost total hallucination on answers in those domains. That is shocking and spectacular. Talking of these sorts of technologies, Wunderkind Waymo, I don't know why I said Waymo like that, but anyway, yeah, Wunderkind Waymo, I'll say it Englishly, is already causing hell. Yeah, driverless cars, but a few of you were very grumpy that I pointed out in a recent clip from the Victoria episode that driverless cars are a stupid dead-end technology. Well, they are. Road CC have picked up an interesting story, which is that Waymo themselves, so Google basically, said... It is normal practice for their taxis to veer into and block cycle lanes. The headline here being, expecting driverless taxis to respect bike lanes is too high a bar because customers want to be dropped off in them, autonomous vehicle firm Waymo tells cyclists. Tremendous work. Yeah, great. So yeah, it's bad enough when other vehicles dive into cycle lanes, but this is going to happen more frequently if these things are allowed to take root. Meanwhile, an interesting story from back over the other side of the pond. Emergency first responders say Waymos are getting worse, with a particularly grim quote from a kind of an emergency responder here. I believe the technology was deployed too quickly in too vast amounts with hundreds of vehicles when it wasn't really ready. The regulators, federal regulators, are kind of seeing more data suggesting that the fire service and police are having more and more problems with these things getting stuck and in the way of their vehicles, in the way of ambulances and so on, because the technology is basically not very good still. And they don't have enough capacity for the emergency takeover human in Manila or whatever it happens to be to come in and drive these things over a whim to have any idea what's going on. So yeah. And yet they are continuing to, somehow these are going to be a savior on Britain's roads. A few of the interesting comments around this going, well, they'll be great in rural areas. Can I remind you that these are all owned by big tech companies who want to make a huge profit? They're not going to run them in rural areas. They're going to run them in city centres where there is already good public transport. They're going to try and saturate out existing taxis and public transport, because that's what they've already tried to do in other cities. Like, it's really key to ensure for you to all understand that this technology, just as with Uber before it, is not designed to service rural areas. And who's going to pay for an extremely expensive car? Councils aren't going to start running these in rural areas. If you think that's true, you've got a bridge to sell you. These are going to just be running in city centres where public transport is already excellent. That's what they're going to do, because that's where the saturation is. One of my favourite emerging genres of local news story is this one. We've got 4 lanes of idiots instead of 2. Furious M6 Junction 10 chaos continues despite 80 million upgrade. Yeah, that's what happens with motorway upgrades, folks. That's just how it works. It's fun to see this starting to appear increasingly in local news. I do enjoy this. This is from the Express and Star, but this is generically swept across all the local news articles of kind of nearby. Yeah, big investment in this junction, and it's been useless because, of course, that's how this works. You've created a giant 4-lane gyratory, and it's going to be stuck as much as the 2-lane gyratory is, because the point is that you've just induced more traffic and it'll get full again. It's just what do you think would happen? So if you spot local stories like this, send them in, everyone. I love them so much. Lastly, let's talk about Chris Gibb, because I've not touched on this yet. It happened a couple of weeks ago, I know, but there's a few things going on here. So firstly, Chris Gibb was fired for publishing his vision for rolling stock, an alternative vision for the trains that will run on High Speed 2 when it opens in some form at some point, because the reset is going really well. More on that in a second. He was fired from his role at the DFTO, the Department for Transport Operator. I think he was like a board member or the kind of exec board, some position that's kind of fairly arbitrary, but he was an advisor essentially to the DFTO. Now, I don't agree necessarily with much of what was being said by Chris Gibb in his actual specific to his vision. Tilting trains are dead. There's no value in kind of doing those. The Pendolinos are near end of life. Go look at a lot of what Chris Howe, Rail Media, has been saying on this stuff. A lot of good detail. But what I think Chris is absolutely rightly pointing out is the complete incoherence of government's current proposals around rolling stock, which is why he got the chop, because it's extremely embarrassing that he pointed them out. They are incoherent. Who gave him the push? I don't know. I don't know if it was necessarily Hendy, although obviously there have been a few people suggesting that it might well have been, given his previous form. I don't know if that's the case. DFTO is not necessarily Hendy's bag. Was it Haynes? I don't know. Was it? I don't know who it was. Anyone who's got any intel on that, I'd be fascinated to actually understand that. But it is a pretty unceremonious ending to Chris's. Well, it's not really the end of his career, but it's a bit of an unceremonious dumping, and it's made the industry extremely pissed off, both publicly and even more so behind closed doors. I wish there was more publicly and less behind closed doors, frankly, but I've been there. I know what the rail industry is like. And actually, Chris is part of that in a way, because he's been very meek, bless him, in his he's been very playing it by the, doing everything right rather than saying exactly what the hell has happened and kicking things over. I've not watched the Green Signals interview, but if there's anything interesting that came out of that, do tell me. But I suspect not, frankly, because Chris is being a good lad and entirely establishmentarian and not really saying very much other than, well, it's a shame I can't really talk about that, or I've been committed to certain things I'm not going to tell you. It's like, no, just spit bars, brother. Tell us everything, because they don't care about you. Why should you care about them back? And ultimately, the rail industry doesn't, the importance of the railways to Britain doesn't care about your NDA, and shouldn't care about, and you shouldn't care about your NDA either. So it'd be nice to learn a bit more. Meanwhile, I should say, the details of the train mess is the fact that we have still got, firstly, the contract for the trains is a shambles because it bears no relevance to the railway that's being built now. Secondly, the trains that are going to be able to run are going to be way shorter than the Pendolinos, resulting in a massive reduction in capacity. A reminder, HS2 is currently being built. It's going to massively reduce capacity across the board, whether it's on the existing network or on HS2 itself. It's just what a shambles. Amidst all this, of course, is the Great Reset happening. This government loves a reset. It's currently doing another one in the midst of collapsing, but more on that in a second. This reset is supposedly going to re-baseline the project, being led by Mark Wilde, who is, of course, a... that reset is turning out to be a hugely wasteful debacle, achieving nothing at this point. I suspect it might bring down yet another senior railway leader all too soon, not soon enough, frankly. So that's all going on. HS2, it's going great. I've collected a whole bunch of HS2 news pieces I was going to do as a bit of an HS2 episode, so perhaps that's one we'll pick up later. But there's a lot and nothing going on when it comes to HS2 at the moment, which is why I've not been talking a huge amount about it, because it's lots of people arguing over very little, frankly. And so we turn to Keir Starmer. Of course, what he did was don't back down, double down. And because what was the title of his little opinion piece he put out in the aftermath of the results? These election results don't mean tacking left or right, but delivering for the whole country. So his view is we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and that's fine. So he sets out his path to break with the status quo once and for all by building a stronger and fairer UK. But you're not, though. You're not building anything. You're not doing anything. You're absolutely not breaking from the status quo. Lots of Labour grandees have been using the word bold a lot in interviews recently. I wonder which party they've stolen that off. Oh, interesting. Anyway, what's actually happening in the Labour Party? Well, he's stuck on a little longer than I thought he might, but only because the party is a mixture of full of cowards. I'm waiting for Burnham to step up. Streeting is desperately trying to get involved here, but we've had, what was it, Catherine West was her name? Just some random MP has basically triggered a process, and might well successfully trigger a process that actually topples Starmer and results in a leadership election before anyone's ready to, before Burnham is able to, because he won't be an MP, which to me is the most hilarious outcome here. Burnham's not going to save the party, I'm sorry, but he might, if he arrives by the next general election, he might steer a Labour Party into a situation where it is at least possible for them to build a coalition with the Green Party to defeat reform. That, if first past the post is still hanging out, or even if it isn't, that is as I say, the only potential usefulness of Burnham becoming the leader of the Labour Party, because he's not going to turn around. It's rotten to the core. And there are too many, he has to get rid of too many MPs who are, cutting the streeting, cutting the Labour together, cutting the Mandelson cloth, that I don't see that he can change that anytime soon. Starmer's, dead man walking, so that I don't expect he's going to survive. The only reason he's in post is because no one's quite got the guts to replace him at this point. But yeah, interesting to watch and entertaining to watch. But you might go, well, if he goes and then the subsequent cabinet reshuffles and all the shenanigans, and of course, don't forget, he goes and someone like Streeting picks up, it won't be long before, will he last until the next local elections? Maybe. Will he survive those local elections? No, because he's going to double down. Will the unions are talking about, they're making big threats, but they're not actually, the affiliated unions, I should say, but are they actually pulling funding? Well, they ought to be at this point, but they're not yet. What does this mean for our lovely railways, though? Well, so we just had the announcement that Great Western are going to be pulled over to flagshag.com. But what does that actually, in terms of the momentum, it's all very well that they're, we're just basically rebranding the train operators and leaving them exactly as they are, but that's not what the unified railway system is supposed to be about. And what I see, what I expect will be we've already had a reduction in focus in terms of the railways. What I see is that there will be a further reduction in focus, a risk that we, in fact, see if someone like Streeting comes in, things could get a lot worse for what the plan is for the railways, because Streeting cares zero for transport and is as arguably as, if not more hawkish than Starmer and Starmer's allies were. Streeting being one of those. So I'm worried. I'm very worried. Does it mean that we see Hendy shuffle off the mortal coil, Alexander get moved? I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see what happens when the reshuffle post leadership change. So watch this space. We're going to see a situation where we're going to have an industry continue to be in limbo for longer and longer, and that really worries me. Before we go, just a quick shout out to all you lovely subscribers. Keep doing that, because we're going to hit our 25,000 target by the end of the year, aren't we, folks? Because 16,883 last time. We broke the 17,000 mark. We are getting there. We are getting there, folks. Thank you so much to those of you who subscribe. But do that now. If you don't already, subscribe. Hit the like button. These things are useful for the algorithm, because Rail Natter is increasingly looking like it might become a major part of my income for the foreseeable. And so, yeah, the more of you subscribe, the more likely that I can pay my mortgage. Thank you so much. It's dark. It's late at night. I need to go to bed because tomorrow morning I introduce my two children to each other. I will see all of you in a few weeks, I think, with a little pause for Rail Natter. I hope you don't mind. In the meantime, all of you take very good care of yourselves. And I will see you soon. I'll speak to those of you in bonus world, in Patreon world, on your little audio bonus snippies. In the meantime, cheerio. Of course, I have to talk about the Class 308. I'd be remiss of me not to. There are a few of these built. They're back from the 1950s, the late 50s. 1959, I think the first batch were built for the Great Eastern Main Line, with batches then being built in basically through to 1961, and running various sort of suburban services around from out of Fenchurch Street and Liverpool Street. In true sign of British cascading magic, the Class 308 was ended up running. They ended up knackered and running services on newly electrified sort of urban lines, the Cross City Line in Birmingham, and then later the Leeds Suburban Electrics out to Bradford, Skipton, and Ilkley. In the last case, they were only retired in late 2001. Ugh, don't we love Britain?